Today we're going to show you how to remove and install your controller on your CrossCurrent step-through and your RipCurrent step-through. This will apply on both the RipCurrent and CrossCurrent step-through models. So we're going to be using a CrossCurrent bike as the basically model bike, but the procedure is going to be identical for the RipCurrent models also. The tools you're going to use are you can use this tri-Allen wrench, and we're going to use the 4mm side of this tri-Allen wrench, a 2.5mm Allen wrench, Phillips head screwdriver, some side cutters or scissors. You're going to also use some zip ties, so good to have some zip ties, and also some isopropyl alcohol to help you put in the rubber channel. I also recommend using some needle nose pliers. This helps with pulling the rubber channel out. You don't have to have this, but it definitely helps. All right, before you start, make sure you power the bike off if it is on, and then remove your battery. We're going to first start removing this upper dock. So you're going to take your screwdriver and you're going to remove the screw right here, holding this faceplate. Just pry the faceplate off. Then we're going to take your 2.5mm Allen and you're going to remove this bolt right here. Just get it enough so you know it's pretty much out of there. And then you got another bolt right down here. You're going to remove that. Loosen it up good. Then you're going to remove the dock. All right, this is your XT60 connection that connects to the controller. If there is a zip tie holding it together, you're going to use these little cutters here. Cut the zip tie, and then just hold it by here, pull it apart, and then set the dock aside. Make sure you don't lose your little bolts also, so keep those along with the dock. Now we're going to remove this lower dock, so take your 2.5mm Allen and loosen the top bolt and this bottom bolt. Remove the lower dock. Make sure you keep the bolts also with the lower dock, because we're going to need them when we reinstall it. Now we're going to remove this rubber strip, this rubber channel here. It's basically a rubber channel cover. You can try pulling it by hand. It might be kind of hard to pull out by hand. But if it is kind of hard to pull by hand, you can use these needle nose pliers. Just be careful and just start pulling down, and then slide it out of the channel. And now you can access all your cabling. We're going to start disconnecting cables. If you have any cable management holding these together, make sure you take that off. It could be a zip tie or something like this kind of curly thing right here. Remove that. And this is your 4-to-1 harness. Just pull right from here. And then also from your headlight, pull those apart. And you can start pulling them down here, removing them from the channel. If they're kind of intertwined, just untangle them. And then you can just kind of let them hang down there. You'll have these two cables here. You won't need to do anything with those. You can just put them back into the channel or just let them hang there until we reinstall everything. All right, now you have all the other connections removed, basically all hanging down. Just make sure here now with the XT60 connection, you kind of push this through. There's like a hole right here. Route it through the little hole there, and then just let it hang down. Now we're going to carefully cut these zip ties. They're holding the motor cable and your cadence sensor cable. There might even be a bundle here. You might have a zip tie there, so just make sure you carefully cut the zip ties, not to cut any of the cabling though. So be very careful about that. So this one right here is for your cadence torque sensor connection. So pull that apart. And this is your motor cable connection. Pull that apart. If you have a later version RipCurrent step through, you will probably have a motor cable here on the left side, on the same side as this brake rotor. So you're gonna do basically the same thing. You're gonna cut the zip ties holding this motor cable. Remember, we did already do on the other side, you would have been disconnecting the torque sensor, cadence sensor cable. So also just cut these zip ties. Then you're gonna pull down here. You're gonna grab this kind of knob right here, this curled knob, and then unscrew it. Unplug the cable, and then you can just let that kind of hang down there. So remember, this is if you have one of the later RipCurrent step throughs. All right, now you're gonna go over here onto your left side, and you're gonna notice there's kind of like a vent heat sink part here that says juiced on there. You got 2 bolts here. You're gonna take the 4mm side of your Allen tool here, and you're gonna loosen those 2 bolts, remove them. Remove this piece right here. Make sure you set that aside. We're gonna reinstall it later. If your controller has a little handle, you can grab the handle and start to pull it out. If it doesn't have a handle, or it's kind of hard to pull out, just take your tri-tool here. There's little holes right here. Just start pushing on the controller. And then you can push the back of it and then start pulling it out. And then just kind of guide all the cabling through. And there, the controller is out. Now we're gonna install the new controller, making sure that these, you got all these holes right here. You'll see with the screw heads on the top, and then you got 2 bolt holes here. And then you got another side that doesn't have any holes on it. So you're gonna make sure that you orientate this as we're putting it in this way facing out, because this is where, with that heat sink and the 2 bolts, are gonna hook into these 2 holes right here. So you're gonna start with the longest cables that you have, and you're gonna put them down here. All right, so you're taking these cables, you're gonna make sure you're trying to orientate them through this hole on the bottom here. Might be a little tricky, so if you can get your fingers in there and grab the cable ends. Might take a few tries. Start fishing the line through, and then as you get to the little bit shorter cables, you're gonna put those in also. What I try to do too is also kind of untangle everything. Make sure it's kind of clean. Now that you have the cables through, you're gonna start sliding this through. Push down on the controller. And then when you see these 2 little bolt holes right here, kind of want them lined up about right at this point there. You want to see them both, and then you can just kind of leave it right there. Make sure all your cables are nice and all the way through, not tangled on anything. Note where these 2 bolt holes are, and then we're gonna put this back in right here. So the juice label, you want it right side up. Should fit right in like that. If you have to move the controller a little bit, you can move it just to make sure we line up, at least line up one of the holes here. You can kind of start it by hand and use the 4mm side of this Allen wrench. Just make sure you're getting a good grip on the controller onto that bolt hole. You don't want to strip it or cross thread it, so it should be pretty easy to go in. If it gives you a lot of resistance, maybe you might have to reposition it a little bit. So you don't want to have to strip those holes in there. And once you tighten one down, the other one should line up pretty well. And also tighten this one down. Make sure they're pretty snug. You're looking at about, like, if you're using a torque wrench, about 6 Newton meters, just snug enough. You don't want to overdo it. And now this plate, this heat sink and plate is on, and now we can go on to the next step. We have the controller in now, and we have all these cables hanging down. If they're kind of all tangled up or whatever, you want to kind of separate them out. So you're gonna find these two right here. This is gonna be your motor connection cable, and then this one is gonna be the cable that's gonna hook to your cadence torque sensor. Also note, if you do have the later version RipCurrent, it's gonna be the other screw-on type of cable, and that's actually gonna go over to the left side. But this is like for these CC bikes, these CrossCurrent bikes, cable's gonna be on this side, and the older RipCurrent, it's gonna be on this right side. So make sure they're kind of untangled, and then you're gonna bring them up through here. We're gonna first start with hooking up our torque cadence sensor connection. This is going to be black tip. This is usually, it could be, depending on the bike you have, this could actually be black tipped or green tipped. It doesn't matter. So you line up these little notches right here. There's a notch here and a notch here. Also, there's little tiny arrows in there. Line that up, click them together. With the motor connection, you're going to line up the arrows, firmly press them together. We'll make sure this is all the way together. Now we're going to take some zip ties and put the zip ties through this slot right in there, through our cable management. Making sure the zip ties are on there snug, but not too tight. Don't want to ever pinch the cables, so I always just make sure they're just snug enough. You can still kind of move the cables, but not so bad that they're actually pinching them. And also make sure you do have some routing underneath here, right under the bottom bracket, so don't forget to get those ones. And even sometimes I like to, even though there's no routing right here, I'll put a zip tie to kind of hold the whole bundle together. Right like that, so it kind of stays out of the way of the chain ring. And then after you got all your zip ties in, cut off all the excess. Now for the owners of the later RipCurrent step-throughs that have this motor cable over here that's going to be going onto the left side, you're going to reconnect this. So push it together, make sure it's screwed together really well, and then we're going to reinstall the zip ties. Just make sure they're snug, not too tight. We don't want to pinch any of the cable. So they're tight enough to hold the cables in, but if it needs to slide a little bit, it can do that. And then just cut off all the excess. And it's all ready to go. All right, so we're now gonna take this one with the XT60 connection, this long cable. We're gonna kind of find at the base of this head tube right here, there's gonna be a hole here at the base. You're gonna get it through the hole right there, and then there's another hole up here. We're gonna pull this through, and then we're gonna hook this back up into your dock. So you can kind of just leave that like that for right now. And then we're gonna start by putting the other two cable, your headlight cable and your main wire harness 1 to 4. Yeah, kind of push them together here, and then I would kind of route them over to one side or the other. It doesn't really matter what side you want. I tend to, if you got your brake hose and your derailleur cable coming out of this side, then I would route them over to the other side. All right, we're gonna have this, these two cables here, your headlight cable and your main wire harness 1 to 4 here, up here. Just try to get them into the channel the best you can. If they start falling out a little bit, don't worry about it. We'll take care of that when we put the rubber piece back in. Take your headlight connections here, kind of look at the little notches there, line those up. There's also going to be these small arrows. Press them together. And then also taking your main wire harness here and your 1 to 4, there's an arrow right there, there's an arrow right there. Line those arrows up, press those together. And now those are all connected. And then if you did have any kind of little cable management or something like that, you can go ahead and put that in, or you can do that a little bit later. I'm gonna just go ahead and put that on right now. This just helps to kind of keep them together. Now we're gonna reinstall this upper dock. So first we're gonna start by reconnecting this XT60 connector. So it's your main power connector. I always recommend zip tying it together. And that keeps it from inadvertently coming apart if it accidentally gets pulled on or something like that. So zip tie it like this. Make sure to cut off the excess. Then you're gonna take your dock and you can kind of just put it in there. You don't want to bind any of the wires, so just kind of let it loosely go in there. And kind of clip the dock in the best you can. Take one of your bolts that you should have saved. And if there's like a longer and a shorter one, I tend to use, so like on this one, you have one bolt a little longer than the other. I would use the longer one on the upper part here. Sometimes they'll be the same size, but if there is a longer one, I would just use it up here. And then just tighten it up. Make sure this is clipped in well too. So again, you want to make sure it's snug, but don't over tighten it. It's very small, thin bolt. You don't want to snap the head off or anything if you overdo it. And now we're going to take this bolt here and we're going to put it through the bottom hole here. Sometimes you might have to kind of push down on this to make sure that we get it aligned with the hole on the frame. Not unusual, it might take a few tries. And when you feel the threads catching, tighten it down. Just make sure it's snug, but not over tight. Double check it. It feels pretty snug on there, and now we're going to put the cover on. Now we're going to put this cover back in. Just kind of snap it in place. Take the screw and your screwdriver. You should feel it catching. Make sure that's on there firmly. And now your upper dock is all ready to go. Now we're going to install the lower dock. So you put that in place. Take one of your bolts. Go through here. A hole right here. So this is the upper one. Again, if you have a shorter and a longer bolt, use the longer bolt up here on the upper part. Tighten that down. And go to the lower bolt, same thing. Kind of press down on it. Should thread in there. One tip though, if it is kind of hard to get this to line up, you can loosen this up just a little bit, and it gives you a little more wiggle room so that you can kind of press down on it and line it up. Sometimes it will seem like it's in there and it's not, so it might take a few tries. And they're pretty snug. Again, don't over tighten them. Since these are really small bolts, you don't want to end up breaking the heads off. So snug, but not over tight. All right, now that's ready to go. And then we're gonna put the rubber channel on. All right, now we're gonna install this rubber channel here. Make sure all your cables are kind of snug inside there. If you have any excess, you might want to push it through. We want to make sure everything is tucked away the way you want it. And then what I do in order to slide this channel, this rubber piece through on the channel, I use a little bit of isopropyl alcohol with this little spray bottle here. Spray the alcohol into the channel itself, kind of lubricates the channel, and then it will eventually dry out. So you can also use soapy water, but I think this is a little better because it will just kind of dry out. So wet that down really well. Bring that into the channel. Might take a few tries. Then push. If it comes out of the channel, sometimes you might have to pull it back a little bit and then reinstall it. As it gets closer to the top, kind of pull the wires apart, then push up and kind of guide it. And it should go in pretty easily. Don't be discouraged if it takes a couple of tries. Or you might have to actually kind of push down onto the cabling a little bit. It might get caught on the cabling. But definitely using some alcohol helps quite a bit. Without the alcohol, it could get really hard to do. And then once you have the channel in there, you're done. Okay, now that we have everything on, you can go ahead and turn your battery on. Take your key. Make sure the battery's in there pretty snug. It's clicked in. Then go ahead and turn on your display. Make sure the display is on. If we got power to the display, we know we're pretty good. What I suggest to do, but be careful, is you can tilt the bike onto the kickstand a little bit. Make sure you're firmly holding it. And you can push onto the throttle. Double check, make sure we're getting power. Go ahead and check, also just check to make sure putting the brakes on. Shouldn't get any power while the brake is on, so we know the cutoff sensor is working well. And then also you can go ahead and turn on the headlight, make sure the headlight's working. When we're pretty sure that everything is working, you can go ahead and test ride the bike. And if everything else is good, you'll be ready to ride. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, contact customer support, and happy riding.